Okay, so let's head into this. So you're in the cloud, but you're still doing this is what we're finding today, with a lot of customers today, and that essentially is, developers filling out their request, or they're meeting the team and saying, hey, I want some infrastructure, and that infrastructure is obviously changing a lot now because it's not necessarily just a VM. It could be Kubernetes cluster, it could be namespaces, could be a mixture of Paas services, but it still feels like we're passing this piece of paper around between teams, right? The server team's handing off, we've got to get network involved. We don't have a cohesive plan for when we, add a new subnet, when we use an existing one. How do security tools get baked in? How does monitoring back up? All these questions still get answered. And, the hope was as we moved into public cloud, with all the new infrastructures, code tools that become, readily available in Amazon, we've got CloudFormation templates, and in Azure, we have ARM templates. The hope was, that people would adopt infrastructure as code more readily, adopt DevOps processes, and go from there. But in reality, we're seeing this is still happening. People are still going in and manually clicking through the portals and things like that. And a lot of that is because they want to put these enterprise controls around things. So this is a problem we're ultimately trying to address. As we looked at provisioning process and deprovisioning processes, which go through that as well, we're still seeing some of these same similarities, right? A lot of sprawl. In fact, sprawl sometimes has increased in the public cloud. Still issues with lifecycle on-premises. VMs haven't gone away. People still need to figure out how to manage them properly. Handoffs already mentioned with that passing piece of paper around between teams. And then we've got the other things like inconsistency in builds, lack of visibility, requests with incomplete data and difficult to automate. And then, how do we integrate technologies like ServiceNow into all of this as well? So these are things that we ultimately, have to address. As we go into, what do we want? What do we ultimately want the outcome of this to be? And it's these 5 things. You can also sort of look back and say, okay, it's speed, quality, and experience, right? The speed is the reduction in the manual steps there, and you're getting that time to market. Reliability really speaks to that quality of everything. And then, experience, satisfaction, visibility. You want somebody to come to your enterprise cloud, and again, you'll see that in the demo, and really just have a good experience interfacing with IT, getting the service they need, making sure it works the same every time, modifying it, giving that flexibility as move into CI/CD and advanced development processes. We really want to kind of change that whole experience. I liken this as well. If you want to put metrics around these things, speed's pretty easy to figure out, and you can figure out how many tickets you put in the various teams to begin with, and then as you tackle these projects, what does that end up being? Quality is really related to incidents and outages, and experience is more, maybe when you leave like the IKEA store or something, you get the smiley face and the unhappy face as to how happy you were. You can put forms on pages to see, how do people feel about your automation hub as a whole. The other big thing that's changing as, we continue, particularly in 2019 and into 2020, it's not really, the focus isn't completely on just automating the data center, automating VMs, and I want to keep stressing that. You'll see some examples of that, but the conversation shouldn't end there. There's sort of a roadmap to interfacing with other areas as well. And so we have to take into account IoT, edge, local data centers, public, and SaaS-based solutions as well. If you look at that in a little bit more detail, our reference architecture and how we look at, the concept of taking the cloud anywhere is because we look at the platform on the bottom. We look at data center, colo, cloud, edge, SaaS, and then we start to, build upon that. Okay, what are we trying to consume there? Well, obviously there's still compute, storage, network, but now we have to consider containers, VMs, serverless, and to some degree there are cases where you might still have some bare metal OS running out there. Our applications and data, we really, look at modern application architectures, sit on top of all of this and are built around those services that we use. And then on the right, if you kind of leave the platform for the moment, you can see everything is, dictated by APIs. It's nothing new. The good thing, today is there's very rarely a vendor application that we have to interface with that doesn't have a rich API. As we look at the stack, security and management tools, we integrate those in. There's a high degree of automation and orchestration now. And one of the things you'll hear me talk about a lot is that while we've had a lot of siloed excellence in automation, the orchestration piece fell away a little bit as people moved into public cloud, and we've really brought a lot of that back front and center. And then ultimately, what is the control plane around all of this? If we look at the, as we kind of hit in, on siloed excellence there, and look at the provisioning process as well, we just kind of hit the problem again here. The other thing to think about is not just the flow time, right? That's the time where you can see we're active and we're waiting, maybe we're emailing requests, maybe we're talking to somebody at the water cooler, and however it is today, if you Teams in somebody to try to get something done, that's part of the problem. The other part that we've seen a lot in large enterprises is just the prioritization process, to get a project spun up, to even, agree to have a team dedicated to you. And there's different models there. We won't get into too much of that today, but I don't want to leave that completely out of the conversation, because there's got to be a way to have development capability around automation. There's SRE concepts that you may have heard of as well that, can certainly get more into. The siloed excellence I kind of hit, I think it goes without saying, individual domains are driving siloed improvements, but how do we stitch all of these things together? And that leads us on to, a modern decoupled architecture ultimately that we focus on. And you'll see these areas here on the left-hand side. In fact, I'll do the laser pointer here. So, there's requests that come in via a catalog, requests that make sense via a catalog, and that might be via ServiceNow today, or perhaps another technology that you use as your catalog and ITIL product. And then we also have to account for, developers aren't going to want to go to a catalog. They might on occasion to get maybe a new subscription or maybe a new Kubernetes cluster, but ultimately when they want to develop and deploy, their applications, they want to do everything inside of that pipeline. And then there are cases where IT might just want to do ad hoc things. They don't really need a form. They're not really in the CI/CD world. What do? The concept that, if we move to the right, and we'll come back to these integration hub and tech orchestrator pieces in a moment. If we look on the right, the concept here really is, what is the stack engine that we want to adopt to create the deployable infrastructure that we can then present back through a variety of mechanisms, either to a catalog or to a CI/CD process, where they're just going to consume it via an API anyway. And whether that's in Amazon, whether that's in Azure, whether that's in Google, whether that's on premises, these are all the sort of target scenarios that we want to address. The other thing is, as we look at Stack Engine, we divide this up into pre-deploy integrations, kind of the cloning and provisioning of the actual component we want, and then post-deploy integrations as well. And think of pre-deploy integrations as everything from, getting an IP address, DNS, Active Directory, things that we might have to do before. Maybe we do change control, but things are high risk beforehand. Post-deploy integrations, all those things that we do after infrastructure is stood up, right? Things like monitoring, backup, et cetera, that all start, part of the whole thing, and we need to get back to the person requesting. And that's really where you think of service onboarding. It's one thing to say, okay, I'm in Amazon or I'm in Azure and I've got a VM, or I'm on premises and I've got my VM from VMware, but is it ready for the end user to consume? And our goal is to stitch all of that together, present it back as a stack. When we're still doing IaaS, if we're not moving into, say, containers and some of the new, immutable infrastructure, and we still want to basically build and destroy, we do need to allow for config management for VMs, so that would still be your Puppet, Chef, and Ansible that we use in those areas primarily. If we kind of break this out a little bit more and start to decouple these products slightly, the reason we do this specifically is there's been a wave over the years where one vendor would always try to manage everything in this picture, whether that's ServiceNow ITOM trying to manage it all, VMware trying to manage it all, some of the new other cloud management capabilities that are out there. And the goal is not to say that those tools can't in some cases, but we need to, we found particularly in public cloud, people want to adopt technologies. They want to keep up with the APIs in Amazon and Azure, and they don't really want to wait for like a CMP tool to become, to get updated so they can deploy that. And so the concept here really is picking the best of breed technologies. You probably have a lot of these technologies already in your enterprise, and then stitching them together in a way that gets presented back up, whether it's through ServiceNow or CI/CD. One thing to note here is that there's always a question, that actually came up, even before here, was, do I want to go through ServiceNow as an example? Do I want to do that every time? And the answer is it depends, because if you've got a pipeline, on the bottom here, and you say, okay, well, I've got everything built out, I've got my API to my infrastructure over here, do I really want to go through ServiceNow? The answer really is, do you want the tracking? Do you want the metrics? Do you want to be able to present the visibility of your automation up to leadership, in that context? And when you go through ServiceNow through something like a Jenkins, we basically would hit ServiceNow through the API. It would submit the request, still go through, and then feed back to us. when that request is complete. But the great thing is because they're decoupled, people can work on their stacks on the right here. Maybe the VMware team is working in something like VRA. Maybe there's an Azure team working in ARM templates, etc. Maybe you adopted Terraform to really embrace the new kind of infrastructure as code methodologies there. Maybe using vRealize Orchestrator to present certain pieces back. And so the tech orchestrator can be a combination of tools here that ultimately we hand off to from ServiceNow. It could be vRealize Automation. I'll show you an example of that. It could be vRealize Orchestrator. It could be Azure DevOps as an example as well. So with that architecture set in there, let me jump over to what this actually looks like in practice. I'm just going to refresh here because I probably need to log back into everything. It's probably timed out a little bit. Yep, there we go. So while that logs back in, what you're looking at on screen here is Automation Hub. This is running on top of ServiceNow. So essentially, we use ServiceNow native components. We customize them. We accelerate the deployment of them. But essentially, we give you a portal for IT where you can present your services into. So the goal here, as we worked with a number of customers, we looked at what are the right categories, first of all, that we should be presenting, right? And then the concepts we hear time and time again is we need a sandbox area where people can go and potentially take the builds and the code and everything they've done in there and move it through from dev stage prod, perhaps building on top of the sandbox concepts they had already. Standard stacks is the big one. I'll show you one of those in a second. DevOps processes as well. And by this we mean it's not enough to just give somebody a stack. Maybe a new developer's joined the team. Maybe they need access. Maybe they need a whole environment and Azure DevOps pipeline set up. We'll talk more about that as we go through. Or perhaps somebody just needs consulting services. Perhaps the requests that are in here, they don't understand them. They need some expertise from IT to really help provide that. The other big thing is if somebody can't find a service, then they can click this and fill out a form or email you to say like the things that they need that you don't have yet, because over time you're going to want to keep adding services to this catalog. There's other dashboards and things we'll get into, but for now we'll sort of hit the catalog first of all. And there you can see those services on the left-hand side again, and I can also filter in here, and I can say like if I want to look at Azure services as an example first of all. And here, this could be everything from a basic VM build. In fact, I'll jump into one here. This could be Red Hat Linux running on Azure, and this is using an ARM template under the covers. We give some basic details of our service offering. This is all customizable. You would decide what you present to the end user, and then you would fill out the form, choose the fields. You would use a lot of the native ServiceNow fields, which you're probably already using for tracking of various business services, and then further details, the ARM template details that you would fill in here. And then, you would hit submit, and that would go and build out the same ARM template that you would have in Azure. If you click the knowledge base as an example, that's where you can add additional details around, and you can see we're going into the ServiceNow interface here, and you'll see this is no different than ServiceNow knowledge base. We can put architecture diagrams, we can put additional information if people want to learn more about that service. So it's also teaching people as they're in the portal, and if they want more information, they can jump into the knowledge base. If we go back for the moment to those standard stacks, the other thing to look at is what if I just want a single OS request on premises? Perhaps I'm using something like VRA. And then I can essentially customize this form again. I can start to say, do I give them all the versions, or do I just give them the latest version of CentOS that they can choose? I can put memory options in here. I can choose lease times. I can choose, CPU instances to deploy, which data center. If you ever come into ahead for a briefing, we have our lab at 401 North Michigan at an Equinix data center, so we'll put this one in 401 North Michigan. And then do I have any regulated data as well that I'm adding here? And these forms can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make them. We typically talk about there's 2 user profiles that you want to account for initially. There's sort of the basic one where maybe you don't give a lot of this info. Maybe you can do small, medium, and large. And there's more power users that are ready to answer questions, right? Maybe you can give them network placement decisions versus where they want to put it. We can choose network placement just based on the data that's in the form. We'll just hard code it in the background, so they don't even need to care about it. We decide it for them. But what happens is, to follow through on that architecture, when I submit something like this, it's going to fire off that request, submit the form here, and momentarily we'll see that build happen in vRealize Automation. And we've got some others, demoed it last week here. You'll see like request approved, connects to VRA, provisioning completed, request completed. Everybody today really, really wants that tracking, if you will. What happened to that request, though, is it goes off to, first of all, this is the Realize Orchestrator. When we want to put a middleman in between, when it makes sense, we can basically do that. And we can, essentially in here say, okay, let's go to the modules, and I'll open up our workflow here. You'll see the ServiceNow incoming request. So this is a workflow that we've designed to basically take into account all the incoming requests coming from ServiceNow. And there we see, at 12:18, that request was fired off, and it's basically to build a VRA blueprint with those variables. The reason we show you this is there's occasions where you do want to go through a middleman orchestrator like this. There's occasions where you might go direct. If we're going through the middleman orchestrator, it allows us to do additional massaging of the variables. So I'm just going to turn my Teams on to Do Not Disturb here very quickly. There we go. And then basically take that action, right? So we go to VRO, we look at the request, and then we decide what to do with it. What happens ultimately, though, is that goes off to vRealize automation, and we can see here our deployments that are happening here. And there you can see it, CentOS 7 on vSphere is in progress, and here's other ones, I've built before. Here's some Windows ones. I have all my actions, my destroy, scale in, scale out, whatever I've assigned here. The beauty of this is that it allows us to continue to build out our infrastructure in vRealize, automation using our blueprint designer for on-premises. We can do multi-machine blueprints. We can do everything we want to do here, from the designer. We're currently in the process of moving to VRA 8.1 right now. This just came out from VMware, and we can certainly give you demos on that. But essentially, we've got this canvas where we can drag and drop different pieces of infrastructure on there, drag and drop our Puppet modules on, or implement Ansible and other things as we sort of move forward. But at the end of the day, if we go back to the catalog itself, they can then check on those requests and see where they are, and then ultimately when they're completed, get notified of that. There's some other things as well. There's dashboards. These are all customizable. Some of these are ready to show, the API usage. So there's different metrics you can put. Yeah, some of these are internal for your team. You can put cost metrics and other things here if you need to as well. So that's basically the portal itself and the catalog that you ultimately get. Before we jump into the DevOps ones, I want to show you another piece of the architecture here. So what we hear time and time again now is it's not enough just to get the VM, just to get the stack even, right? It's how do I fully enable the developer there to be armed and enabled, right? And going back to that example, a developer might come in and say, actually, I need a new environment for the product team, and that involves I want a new DevOps project, all these different things. And in this example, what we do is we use Azure DevOps as the technical orchestrator here to go ahead and build these things on the right. So we might build a new DevOps project. We might clone a new repo in Git, in GitHub there. We might interface with a code scanning, like SonarQube. We might have a container registry we create. We'll create a sample pipeline for them as well. Maybe if we're using Terraform, there's a new app workspace, and then we can define additional infrastructure in that workspace. And then maybe we integrate it with Teams or Slack here for additional, integration, and then monitoring as well. So the idea here is that I don't just want a single VM. I want more, right? So if we jump back, go to DevOps services, and one example we have here is App Dev Platforms, Java on AKS. This is one we continue to evolve with a number of customers right now. And we're building this on top of Azure Kubernetes right now and using a Spring Java stack in Azure DevOps. And essentially this, clones a repo with code. And, right now we're saying give them simple requests of small, medium, large, and a project name. We might even dynamically generate these projects very soon as we continue to advance this particular service. But ultimately it'll integrate all these pieces, submit, and then the user gets, they can go into Azure DevOps and basically get their pipeline. There's other things as well we're continuing to add. We had this in the previous version and are updating in this version of Automation Hub now, like increasing resources, updating clusters, adding namespaces, sandboxes as well. We can add the standard stacks, but the concept of a sandbox project and converting a sandbox to a full project is something we're heavily working on right now with a few customers as well. So pretty exciting what we continue to build out here. And we still got the old version of the portal as well that we can access, but the new categories, the new alignment here is really what we continue to strive towards. So let me jump back over to some of the slides and finish off some of the topics here. So for one, this tracking via ServiceNow, it's very, very important to think this, decide this early on. One, do I want to report back with metadata? The answer is probably yes. But then decide, well, how many progress stages do I want? Some people have like 20 stages. You can choose 5 stages. It could be pre-provisioning, phone in, post-provisioning, and then maybe some certification and security, and maybe a change control, right? Something like that. That's automated as well. But the goal is that everything in the build process is automated end-to-end throughout, and we ultimately want to present those stacks directly back to the user. In terms of how do we help in this area? So one, we have design and deploy services for Automation Hub. We can develop blueprints for services. We can establish an enterprise cloud operating model, and we have training and operations material as well, which is a big part of what we do today. In fact, we do things around capacity management and all those pieces there. So with that, I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions. If you have any, just fire them off there. I'll start monitoring. I know there's a lot of people in attendance here, so definitely automation is a hot topic right now. So Caitlin, if there's any questions, if you could let me know, I'll keep monitoring the chat here for a minute, and we'll see what we've got.
Yeah, it looks like we have one. He's asking, can we rebrand this to make it look like our portal?
Yeah, absolutely. So in fact, let me jump back over to the portal here. So if I jump into, we might even have a link still to one of our old portals here as well if we want to go into it. So there's a couple of skins that we ultimately have here, right? This is another example of something that we built where we sort of skinned it this way, and you go into cloud provisioning, and then you get sort of VMware, Azure, AWS, multi-cloud, examples. So you can click Azure here, and there's that same Red Hat Enterprise catalog item that I showed you previously. So there's a couple of templates that we have here. The good thing is this is all built upon ServiceNow, Service Portal technology. So yeah, we can there's different skins, different ways to do it, different ways to put all the status approvals alert in here. We've got the one I kind of showed you before, which is this one. This is a new kind of layout that we're using. We just think it's more organized at scale when you have lots and lots of items. This other example gets a little bit more tricky, just from screen space perspective, and you end up having more and more categories. But yeah, a lot of ways to kind of do this. But these are the two primary methods that we have. But yeah, absolutely, you could skin it a number of other ways as well. The key here, if I just go back to the PowerPoint slide here for a minute, this architecture, this decoupling is really, really key because it allows us to do what we want to do here in ServiceNow. The one big shift that you'll see is we've adopted Integration Hub, which ServiceNow is heavily advancing, and they use a flow designer, and you can build modules of code integrations there, so it makes it much, much easier for us to decide, okay, I'm going to reach over directly to say VRA here, or I'm going to go through like a tech orchestrator like VRO, or the tech orchestrator is VRA. We can just decide. We can make good choices. We don't have to have one tech orchestrator per se, but don't have too many. But it makes it easy from a ServiceNow integration perspective, and then we can make this part up here, the actual request and form, as intuitive as we want to. So I think that answers your question there. Any other questions there in chat? I've got one here. So what about going from CI/CD to ServiceNow and tracking? Okay, so going back to, we hit on that a little bit. So essentially, the question here is, do you go direct to the stack engine, or do you go through ServiceNow, right? So again, going back to that benefit, if you want to go through ServiceNow, what you have to do is have a job ID or something that exits this area that you pass into the request, and then in Integration Hub through the flow, we use that variable to know who to talk back to tell you when it's done. So that's the only critical component there. As long as we present the service back as an API through here, through ServiceNow, then you can hit the catalog item, directly from your CI/CD tool. Goes along the path, goes up here, kind of builds, the request still gets filled out, change, everything in the stack still happens, everything gets built, and we just tell you when it's done. So from that perspective, the stack is just an API basically. Yeah, question, yeah. So how mature are the decommission processes? Yeah, so there's a couple of key things there. One, as you build something, you should build the automation to decom it as well. Definitely in the public cloud, that's a lot easier because we're dealing with stacks that we can just tear down, like in Azure, you just destroy the resource group in many cases. On premises, we just have to make sure that we create the decommissioning workflow at the same time as creating the provisioning workflow. And then as we hit the destroy button, it'll basically tear that down. There's a few ways to do the actions for that. One would be to add it to the CMDB itself, so then you can say destroy. The other part is through the ServiceNow, the VRA plugin, where you just have those features directly available. But that's going to ultimately, the API call is going to go out. VRA is ultimately going to initiate the destroy, and then through the lifecycle operations that will happen. So, in fact, if I sort of jump to VRA for a second, what you have, I didn't really talk too much about lifecycle workflows, but essentially you have these life cycles here. We have 4 primarily, and I've got a video we can kind of talk through as well. We've got points at which we want to exit the flow and do extra automation, right? So think of vRealize automation. It does manage life cycle, but it doesn't do a lot of the automation itself. It hands off to other tools to do that. So when you're requesting the machine, you could say, okay, I want to go and run some additional pieces, right? And you can drag and drop, not too many on the requesting phase, but you can drag and drop, automation objects and Lego bricks in here that you ultimately want to do. When you're building the machine, that's the pre-provisioning phase. So as an example, for all of our servers, we do like create a computer object in an organizational unit. That's like us integrating with Active Directory as an example there. When the machine is provisioned, that's that post-provisioning phase. We would have workflows that happen there as well. Like in some cases, this is in our lab, so we have things like move the VM to a specific folder based on the requester in our lab. We have move the VM to reservation pools and things like that, add A records, all those kind of things. And then dispose in same concept, right? When we dispose, what are things we want to do? So we want to remove that A record from Microsoft DNS as an example. So we would try to always, as we create the provisioning process, think about the entire life cycle of the machine. So we're also coding the deprovisioning process as well. There's a video we use quite heavily for things like this. So we have some of this Visio flow, and then ultimately we have swim lanes like pre-clone, post-clone. This is a VM example clearly. And then we have config management. That's that Puppet Chef Ansible for like Datadog, SCOM install, AV, and then retire workflows that we have there as well. So plenty of ways to things to account for, but obviously once we look at all this, we want to try to keep this simpler. And it's like, okay, do we really want to manually connect to SCCM and assign to a patching collection? Maybe not. Maybe we tag it. Maybe we use the OU structure to decide that. There's different tricks that we can use to avoid creating as many Lego bricks of automation when we can ultimately help it. So the other part, it's a great question. So I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent here as well. It's just on the concept of building blocks, I think is key as well. When you look to those workflows there, ultimately we create these building blocks, Lego bricks we talk about them as, right, in terms of things that we want to do, right? And these are very basic examples just for illustrative purposes. But then we take those pieces of automation, those are those components you saw in the Visio, and then stitch them together. They sort of flow to the right here. They sort of drag across to create an orchestration workflow. Then in config management, very similar, right? We've got roles. We want to create an IS, so the VM's online on the network. Let's take these 3 areas, let's build modules around them, create a role, and then we assign that role to the virtual machine. And so the end-to-end process looks something like this. The web server request might go out. All these sub-automation tasks don't take a long time. They talk to all the various systems. We might clone the server here. These are all, again, the sub-components all stitched together. And then at the end, then let's say we had 10, 15 things that happen there. We've got a VM online on the network. Then we hand off to configuration management and ultimately configure the VM itself. It becomes that web server, and then it goes off to change control as well when it's done. So great question. The other thing I'd also sort of illustrate on that, again, I'm going to keep going on tangents, so everything's great, is when you're doing Paas, it's a little bit different. We sort of just move up to the cloud here, and then we sort of crank through all the different things. We don't have as many handoffs, that we do in the IaaS world. So we sort of build the server there, and then we hand off to still config management and change control. So a few different options there that we get into. So I'm going to jump back to our Q&A slide here, see if we've got any more. I'm checking here. Caitlin, you got anything there?
Looks like we got one there.
Yeah,
what are pitfalls or stumbling blocks you see with organizations trying to deploy an automation hub?
What was the first part? What are the blockers? Or
The stumbling blocks or common pitfalls.
Stumbling blocks? Yeah, no, actually, this is coming up a lot lately. And I think, when we look at customers who've done this very, very well and customers that haven't, I think, one, there has to be complete buy-in from upper leadership that this is an ongoing project, right? This isn't something that just ends because, you automated build, the project's closed. We sort of look at it this way, right? Automation hub deployment is one piece of hopefully something you adopt as a team. Our goal ahead is always to enable our customers to adopt and embrace an automation, team, if you will, and continuously automate and advance, right? So you might start off with a, Windows and Linux build, great. We got that out the way, or maybe we're building Kubernetes clusters, whatever's relevant to you. It could be onboarding, could be IP address requests, anything like that. But really, I would say be prepared to build and invest, and people need time to focus on this. This can't just be something we do when we've got spare time. And the concept of SRE, site reliability engineering, really that concept's been around since we started these projects, which was people need focus, they need time, and they need a dedicated, focus time to basically get this stuff done. If this is something where, hey, I'm fighting a fire and then I get 30 minutes to automate here and then I go back, it just doesn't work. You can't make the progress. You're relearning every time you go back. It's just not feasible. So that's, I'd say, step one. The other part, I'd say, just don't overcomplicate it. The reason even the simplified architecture, which is vastly simpler than previous, it can still be easy for you to sort of try to do too much and create an automated task for X and an automated task for Y, when maybe you just shouldn't be doing that piece, or maybe you could tag the VM a certain way and it inherits the automation somewhere else, or the third party, I should say, picks up that tag and then automates operationally. That's what I'd say. Just keep it simple, focus on the big wins, focus on where your pain points are, and you'll be better off. But yeah, overcomplicating and not having enough time, I think, are the biggest stumbling blocks that we see. Okay, the only other one I've got here is what product should I use as a tech orchestrator? Yeah, so going back to this slide over here, if you want, I'll sort of just massage what we've got on screen here to illustrate the point. Certainly when you're doing it on-prem, we would say it's a mixture of, so let me bring this to the front here. Into front. Okay, I'm just going to copy this guy out. Try it again. I think you get the point, right? So anyway, the vRealize Orchestrator is one example that could be the tech orchestrator. And then when you are, say doing something in the public cloud with Azure, or even, it could be Azure DevOps that you use to kind of do the complete build. It could be VRA in here as well. There's no right or wrong answer per se. It's the right tool to get the stack that you've created into ServiceNow in the cleanest and simplest possible way. And this is an area you want to keep, very, very, very simple, right? In terms of, if we're going to put a middle piece in between here, what is its purpose? Is it to really interpret, look at variables coming in from ServiceNow and change them as they go to the stack? Or do I just want to fire off directly? And also look at the VRA to ServiceNow plugin. They just updated it. I wouldn't say we've given it the green light yet. We're still working on it. The team, continuously is, they'll check in to see if that's viable now, and then maybe we'll just present the VRA stacks back in. Terraform's another tool to really look at adoption. If you can adopt the principles around Terraform and the cultural change that implies, and really adopt an infrastructure as code, Terraform's a great tool as well that can fit in there. So no right or wrong answer. Whatever makes sense. We can chat through those options with you, when it makes sense. Okay, looks like that is all of them, right, Caitlin?
Yep, I don't see any other questions in here.
Okay. All right. Well, with that said, I guess we'll end off here. Going back to how we can help, we certainly do deeper dives on these technologies. I sort of gave a glimpse of a couple of tools there and our approach, through ServiceNow, through the VMware stack. We've got Azure demos online you can look at as well. There's a whole bunch of links on our Ahead.io page where we've already, the internal team has recorded things. But yeah, let's, happy to do deeper dives internally with the team. Just reach out to us and, we can get the team engaged. And, thank you for everyone from the community for joining as well. Appreciate the questions. We look forward to continuing to iterate on this. This is a full-time project for us internally where we continue to iterate. Just back to that question, actually, on how do you ensure success? We've had to adopt very similar principles internally. We have a Jira backlog of things going in and out. We've got some new AWS services going in. We've got some additional Azure services. That whole DevOps environment is about to get released this week. More VRO services, so a lot more Kubernetes services. So it just continues to iterate. We've got our teams, as our practices are ahead and how they're organized, they're all working, there's a backlog they work towards. So pretty excited about the progress we've made there. So with that, I'll end it off here. Thank you, everyone, for joining today. Really appreciate it. And, stay tuned for more of these as we continue to share what the internal teams are building.